Well, good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, depending upon where you are in the world, and welcome to today's DevOps.com webinar. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, moderator for the event, and I welcome you. We have a really great webinar on tap with an awesome panelist, but before we get started, we do have a few housekeeping items to go over. First of all, today's event is being recorded, so if you miss any or all of the event, you'll be able to access it on demand later on. Post-event, we'll be sending out an email with a link to access the webinar on demand. And we are taking questions from the audience. So if you have a question at any time during the presentation, just use your GoToWebinar control panel, submit your question, and we should take a few minutes before the end of the webinar to go over those audience questions. And finally, we do have a polling question during the presentation today, so please, we invite you to participate and share your thoughts with us. Okay, with that, we'll go ahead and get on with today's webinar, which is Improving Regression Testing Effectiveness with Defect Detection Percentage. Easy for me to say, oh boy. Our speaker today is Matt Angerer. He's actually a very nice guy, and he's a Senior Solutions Architect at TaskTop. Matt is passionate about improving software quality and loves to share what he's learned in a variety of QA and testing leadership roles through his writing and presentations, such as this one. He has more than 15 years of experience in enterprise mission-critical system implementations and support for global multinational companies. In his current role, Matt works with software development teams to integrate their ALM and DevOps tools. Welcome, Matt. Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks so much, Charlene. So today, we're going to be exploring the mechanics of defect detection percentage. Okay, the topical areas I want to cover is first and foremost, I want to speak to you about some of the industry feedback we've seen over the years, highlighting some of the excerpts from the latest World Quality Report published by Micro Focus, Sogeti, and Capgemini. After we do that, we're going to go ahead and get into defect detection percentage. I want to define specifically what it is for you and how it's calculated. And then we'll get into some of the implications of DDP and how value stream integration can help. And then we're going to actually get into some of the really cool stuff, and that's a live demo of both ALM.net and ServiceNow working in conjunction with one another. And we'll bring up some live reports that we have in Tableau as well to show you the real-time calculation of defect detection percentage. You might also hear of it as defect detection effectiveness. Okay, so the World Quality Report, this is a report that's published every year. It's between Micro Focus, Sogeti, and Capgemini. They survey thousands upon thousands of organizations across the globe, and these organizations provide their candid feedback in terms of how they're doing with software and quality assurance and testing. Some of the excerpts I want to share with you here on this slide relate to the latest World Quality Report, and the results that just came in indicated that hybrid agile framework is the new norm. Organizations are adopting a combination of different methodologies: SAFe, Scrum, Kanban, XP, DSDM, and waterfall methods. I underscore waterfall methods because it just hasn't went away yet. I know that we're pushing towards Agile, we're pushing towards DevOps, but you're going to see that a lot of organizations are adopting what fits best for them in this day and age. And 99% of the survey respondents say that they have difficulties with testing in Agile development. That's almost 100%, 99%. It's extremely worrying, particularly as challenges persist across the board with little change since last year's study. Also, we're noting from this report that a common challenge among practitioners is difficulties in identifying the right areas on which tests should focus, and early involvement of testing team in inception phase or sprint planning. So those are two components we'll touch upon in today's webinar: identifying the right areas on which tests should focus, okay, and that early involvement of your team further left in that software delivery lifecycle. Also, too, the research is showing that a large proportion of us, and you might be a test manager sitting watching this today or a QA leader, a large proportion of us have self-admitted, or a peer has provided this input, that they lack the skills around strategy and design when it comes to the master test strategy in an organization. So this has grown from 22% in 2016 to 32% in 2017, and seems to continue to grow. So many QA leaders and testing managers are having difficulty with this bird's eye view, or this eagle's eye view, required to uncover inefficiencies in their end-to-end process. So a key recommendation that the World Quality Report has provided for us organizations is to define our QA analytics strategy at the enterprise level. So this underscores that the answer may very well lie in the data, okay? The data that we're tracking in all of these different systems that we're using on a day-to-day basis, right? So one of the things I wanted to show you here, and this is, for the folks on the line, if you've never heard of him, Tony Robbins has been around for quite some time. He has a number of different self-improvement books, and he does webinars, he does live shows. Actually, he does a show in Boca Raton, right where DevOps.com is located, on a yearly basis. One of the things that he's very popular, one of his taglines, and he has many taglines, but one of them that really resonates with me is, where focus goes, energy flows. Okay, so this relates to me around, are we measuring the right stuff? So as quality assurance and testing leaders, we've spent a lot of time likely in our careers measuring the amount of tests that are executed, or the amount of tests that failed, or the defects that are logged in a specific test phase, the defects that are fixed, how fast they're fixed, how fast we're retesting those defects, or even how many automated tests we're able to create and execute over a specific build before it hits production. We're really good at measuring these types of metrics because, heck, they're productivity metrics, and we want to show the world that our team's working really hard to protect that productive environment. But at the end of the day, if you think about it, are these metrics really going to make anybody in your C-suite or your executive level lean forward in their seats and pay close attention? Probably not, unless there's a huge sheer volume of critical defects that just aren't being fixed in time and sending your build off track, okay? One of the key items that have come forth from the 9th edition of the World Quality Report is quality assurance leaders like you and I, or me in a previous life, we're getting back to the basics now, because we're realizing a lot of these metrics that we've been reporting on and spending so much time and energy on are simply proxies. They're not getting to the crux of the matter, the problem. So it relates back to, where focus goes, energy flows. So are we focusing on the right things? And I want you to think about this message, this tone here, as we work our way through this webinar. And I'll show you why it matters as we move into the live demo version. So before we do that, let's look at some of these common QA and testing metrics that we're all used to. We see these on a day-to-day. If you pull up HP Quality Center or Micro Focus Quality Center now, these are very common, right? I mean, you can go to the analysis items and generate these on the fly. Active defects, covered requirements, authored tests, failed tests. These have been around for a very long time, not only in a project-oriented mindset, but also, too, some of these tests are going to be monitored even if you're moving forwards into a regression testing mindset, where you're in quote-unquote steady state, right? When you're in steady state, you're releasing service packs, or you're releasing small bug fixes and change requests, so you're doing that regression testing, right? You're monitoring all of these, I bet. If I look at your quality assurance and testing metric dashboard, you have a lot of these being monitored today. Now, some of organizations may say, Matt, that's not true. These covered requirements, we're not doing that. We don't have a test coverage analysis report. And not having some of that stuff is a byproduct of not having traceability in place underneath the hood. And we're going to show you how to solve some of those problems today as well. Okay, but not only are organizations measuring these common QA and testing metrics, they're also measuring the test execution velocity. So that's another key measure. And in DevOps, speed is paramount, right? The focus is on speed, and there's often that tug of war between speed and quality. But we're going to show you today how focusing on something different may actually reduce that tug of war between speed and quality and allow you to move harmoniously together. So what about effectiveness? This slide here is, we're not talking about the effectiveness of, how easily you can build a new automated test, or how skilled your team is at designing lots and lots of manual tests, or whether or not your user story is covered by a test, or how quickly your team retests a bug fix to meet your sprint dates. We are talking about the effectiveness of protecting your productive environment from failures, otherwise known as incidents, okay? See, we are in the game of protecting our productive environments. Quality assurance and testing professionals, our job is to ensure that we uphold the brand quality of our organization. And in most organizations today, we are software-defined enterprises. A catastrophic defect that slips into production, whether you are the quality assurance leader of a large global SAP landscape, a large global Oracle landscape, or even a SaaS platform, any sort of anomaly that gets past your team and gets into that production environment could send your business operations awry, okay? The inability to ship product from one distribution center to the next results in millions of dollars in loss, or even embarrassing defects that make it into production impact your brand quality. All of these things matter, okay? So we're going to show you how to focus on the right thing today to protect your productive environment, and the end result is really, it's going to give you the fuel that you need to improve upon your quality assurance processes, both prevention and detective techniques. So if you look up effectiveness in Google, if you Google effectiveness right now, if you get a chance, the definition that comes up is the degree to which something is successful in producing a desired result. Okay, today we're speaking about defect detection effectiveness. You'll also hear it called defect detection percentage, DDE, DDP. It's the same thing. It's the same calculation, okay? This is power, and this is a synonym for effectiveness, power. So how powerful are we at protecting our productive environments? And these are some of the questions that I've been asked in my career. I've consulted across 8 different industry sectors and been involved in 10 end-to-end SAP implementations. Now, I don't say this to impress you, I say it to impress upon you the vast array of different experiences I've had with different organizations. But some of the underlying themes, or some of the common questions that always seem to come back to me in my career, where, Matt, can you tell us how effective your team is doing? What kind of data can you show us to support your team's testing effectiveness? Are your QA processes improving the quality of our software over time? And can you estimate how much money the QA team has saved our organization? So these are C-level questions that are going to come at you. And me, as I was a consultant for a period of time, so I had direct interactions with a lot of the purse string holders, so to speak, and they asked me these hard questions. So I had to figure out how to answer them. And it wasn't about showing them a defect report. It wasn't about showing them how many tests we executed, because frankly, they did not care about that. It was, at the end of the day, show me how you're justifying your value on our team, okay? So with that being said, I want to conduct a quick poll, and Charlene is going to go ahead and administer that poll to the team here, and we're going to look at and ask everybody on the line, do you track defect detection percentage today, also known as defect detection effectiveness?
There you go. The poll should be up on your screen now. Are you currently calculating DDP in your organization? So you can select one of the following: yes, no, or I'm not sure. And while everybody's putting in their answer, I just want to remind the folks that we are taking questions at the end. So if you have a question for Matt at any time, just use your control panel and submit your question. We'll get to it. We'll probably take around 15 minutes or so near the end of the presentation. Okay, we have got, the majority of folks have voted, so I'm going to go ahead and close the poll in 2, 1, closed. Okay, here we go, guys. Hold on, pushing out the results. Let's see, sharing them. Looks like the majority of folks are not calculating DDP. Matt, what do you think about that?
Well, you know what, that's pretty common. It is
Yeah.
common, but I bet if we asked the question, if most folks were calculating the other metrics I put up on the board, then I would venture to say 80 to 90% of the folks listening today would say, yes, we are.
Uh,
And, the thing about DDP is this. There are some basic ingredients that are involved in this cake batter, okay? And the basic ingredients, it's not overly complicated. This isn't rocket science, what I'm going to show you today. But what I like to say is DDP is simple, yet it's complex. And I'll show you why it's complex here in a minute. But these questions, these are rhetorical, right? I'm not expecting an answer. The polls are done. Okay, so do you track bugs and incidents? I'd like you to think about that. I'd also like you to think about, do you track what testing layer a bug was found? Sure you do. Everybody does. I mean, if you're using one of the best-in-class tools in the market today, you're going to identify whether you found that in unit testing, interface integration testing, UAT, or regression. Do you track what release a bug fix was moved to production in? Sure you do. You want that trail of auditability, right? You want to be able to look back and see when was that bug fixed, when was it retested, and when was it bundled into that latest build and moved into our productive environment. And do you track the date, time an incident was logged by your end user? Yes, you do, because that's often a standard, or it's a by default. The system is tracking it for you, whatever you're using, unless you're using Microsoft Excel, and then you probably track it by default as well. Okay, so these are different things. Of course you do. Then why aren't you monitoring DDP in real time? And this is probably the reason why, and I'm going to explain it here. So DDP, it's simple, yet it's complex. Okay, here's what it is. So for each testing stage, whether that be unit, system, integration, UAT, or regression, you're logging defects, right? Eventually, you're going to deploy or release into your production environment. So let's face it, you can't test forever. Sooner or later, the business will accept that you have covered all the scenarios that you had in scope within the application under test, whatever you're testing, and it's time to release the software to your business or consumers. So looking at this slide, let's say you found 20 defects in your latest regression testing stage of your last monthly service pack, and you released it to your production environment, say on August 1st, okay? So August 1st, your end users throughout the world are working with your software and identifying incidents. They're consuming your software, they're finding things that just aren't right, or things, that look a little bit awry. And they're logging those incidents into tools like ServiceNow, Zendesk, Remedy, Solution Manager, maybe even SharePoint. So fast forward 22 days, it's August 22nd. We're sitting here today watching this webinar. It's August 22nd. In that period of time, your end users, let's say they identify 12 incidents. So that's from August 1st to August 22nd. Now let's take a look how it's calculated, okay? So those 20 here, see, those 20 incidents that are found, plus the 12 that were identified before in the regression testing stage, a little bit of division, and you come up with 63%. Okay, after the deploy point. It seems overly simple, right, in terms of calculating defect detection percentage. The formula is the crux of the problem that we see a lot of organizations, and even in my experience, is if the data is not readily available in front of me in the system that I'm mostly using, which at the time, over the course of my career, SAP and HP, now Micro Focus, had a very tight partnership. And oftentimes, large-scale SAP implementations, the use of Quality Center was in place for those implementations. So the analysis items, the data available to me at that time around defects, never lent itself to calculating DDP. Okay? What we see today in the industry is a myriad of different best-in-class tools working in concert together. So not only are we using test management platforms such as ALM, we're also using vulnerability scanning tools such as Sonar or Fortify. We're also using ITSM tools such as ServiceNow, such as Sharewell, such as BMC. The list goes on. We're also using SharePoint. We're using Microsoft Excel. Data is coming from all angles. And if we're not prepared to consolidate that data and bring it into a centralized data store to report on top of it and create a metric such as DDP, simply put, we're not going to do it if we don't have the enabling technology to do so. In my prior life, I had a team of testing coordinators, and in different consulting engagements, I had them as well. We would often use them as manual labor to create the different metrics that were required when you have data points from multiple sources, okay? I call this a Swiss Army knife approach to creating metrics, because you're pulling data from everywhere. You're slicing and dicing, you're manipulating, you're massaging the data, you're bringing it into Excel, then you're reporting it out in a static manner. It becomes a balance sheet, right? It's a snapshot point in time, but that snapshot point in time can change at any second. And that's what's the double-edged sword around software today. Is in a moment's second, a catastrophic defect can throw your team off track. 1 minute you're celebrating, the next minute you're crying because you missed something that you should have caught. And what I'm suggesting to you in the next slide is, why don't we just change the paradigm when it comes to tracking things like defect detection percentage, as opposed to the archaic methods around snapshot point in time, spreadsheets that we send out via email, a dashboard that never updates. You have the ability through enabling technologies, and we'll get into the details here, where you can flow and consolidate this data into a centralized data store and report on top of it. Okay, what you're seeing here is a live chart we're going to show in our demo here in a few minutes, but this is DDP. Okay, on the left-hand side, the yellow bars that you see coming up from the x-axis, those are defects that were found during the regression testing stage, that scenario that I just spoke about. All right, on the right-hand side, you're seeing incidents that are identified by your end users consuming your software. And if you look at the triangle or the diamonds across the top, it starts at 100% at your release point. So this build went into production on, August 1st. You can see how it drops 97%, 76%, 67, all the way down to 52% on August 20th. Now, I'm going to go ahead and create a few defects or a few incidents. I'm going to show you how this updates in real time. But even more powerful is you can take these types of reports that use data points from multiple systems, and you can actually start to calculate your cost of quality. Now, this webinar is not about how to calculate cost of quality, but I want to be very clear about that. This webinar is about defect detection percentage and effectiveness. However, I felt it was necessary to show you this slide, because I'm going to show you in the next slide how the calculation can be tied into that report. So this is a powerful way to show your leadership team the monetary value associated with your team efforts, okay? Oftentimes, QA becomes an afterthought. We see that in a lot of organizations. Your timeline crunches, okay? And then it's like, throw it over the fence. Let's have QA test it and see what they come up with. Or, hey, we don't have time to get through this testing layer. We're going to have to push further. Well, let's change the paradigm, like I just said in the previous slide. Let's look at the monetary value that we're bringing, our teams are bringing to the organization. And you can do that by calculating cost of quality, but tying it to a chart like this. And what I mean by this is this. The cost of quality in your organization is going to be calculated markedly different from the cost of quality in another person's organization on this webinar. We all come from different industry backgrounds, different vertical markets, okay? So it changes based on the market that you're in and the inputs that are from your business. So determining cost of quality is a matter of coming together amongst your business leaders and deriving that figure. For this chart, we put an arbitrary value associated with it. So if you look to the left of the release line in the middle, that vertical line, the green one there, these are the defects that were identified. To the right, these are the incidents. So an arbitrary value for each of the defects that's identified, say you put an arbitrary value of $2,000 on each of those. So it costs you $2,000. That is the identification of the defect, the fixing of the defect, the retesting of a defect. And I'm trying to keep it very simple for this equation. So you have a bunch of defects and you add up that, you multiply by $2,000. And you see on the right side, you have a bunch of incidents identified in production. And you know, as well as I know, anything identified in production is usually 3 to 4 times the cost. right? So that jumps up to $8,000 per incident as an example, right? Arbitrary value again. So you can begin to then show your QA team savings and costs, okay? On the left-hand side, you're saving your organization money because you're identifying defects before they make it to your production environment. On the right-hand side, guess what? You fell down. You did your organization a disservice because the quality of your regression test suite was not effective enough to stop the introduction of those bugs into your production environment. So you cost your organization money, and you can begin to say, here's my equity on the left, here's my cost on the right, let's do some simple deductions, and this is what, at the end of the day, I have brought in terms of monetary value to our organization. So we've built those into these charts that we're going to show you here shortly. So what are the implications of DDP? Okay, so like any other metric that you measure, you don't ever take anything at face value, right? You have to always, the devil is in the details, of course, right? One of the things about DDP is this. A high DDP of 90% or more can mean a few different things. For starters, it might mean that your testing is outstanding, right? Great job. Your team is doing fantastic. Or it could mean that there was limited usage of your application under test in a real world scenario. On the flip side, with a DDP of less than 65%, this is what I call the reflection period. We have to ask ourselves a few questions about, hey, were the requirements too ambiguous to develop good quality tests? Was there a lack of QA and testing involvement early on in the software delivery lifecycle? Or perhaps there was a limited use of data sets for automated regression tests, or maybe our testers were inexperienced, or maybe there wasn't enough exploratory testing, or maybe there wasn't enough time to test. So there's all these different things that you have to think about when you're monitoring and evaluating DDP. The value comes from monitoring it over the course of time, because you can identify trends, you can identify movements and patterns. That is the true value and the power of DDP. But in order to monitor DDP, you need to have enabling technology to tie it all together, okay? And make no mistake, there's ways that you can build this, but the fact of the matter is, look at all the best-in-class tools that make up our ecosystems today as quality assurance testing leaders. We have tools galore, and we have organizations where we have different business units using different tools and different tracking devices. We have things coming in the market. Fortify is a great tool. I've used that on demand, SonarCube. These are security vulnerability scanning tools. So as vulnerabilities are identified, those are defects. You want that to feed into your particular equation. You want that to feed into that centralized SQL Server database. You want the incidents to feed over. You want the bugs that you're identifying in ALM, Jira, VSTS, SmartBear, QA Symphony. There's a lot of different tools on the market today, but you want them to be able to feed into a centralized data store so you can start to calculate this DDP in a real-time basis going forward. Okay? So how does value stream integration help? Okay? Deming said it best. He said quality is everyone's responsibility. It's not just our responsibility. We can't be the ones holding the bag all the time. There has to be a concerted effort across the organization, a common understanding that everybody is in this canoe together. We're all in the same boat. Whether you have the row and I have the bucket, when water comes in, it doesn't matter. We're all in the same boat, because if we sink, we're all sinking together. So value stream integration really is about connecting the people, the activities, and the activities in your software delivery toolchain by automating the flow of value from ideation to production. Okay, let's read that again. It's about connecting the people and activities in the software delivery toolchain by automating the flow of value from ideation to production. Okay, so if you have a fragmented toolchain, whether that's the tools that you have, if your tool chain is fragmented, your people are going to be fragmented because they're not singing from the same song sheet, and your processes will begin to fall apart as a result. So what I'm suggesting in this scenario is taking a better look end-to-end holistically in your organization to make sure if you're tracking incidents in one tool, make sure that you have a a line of sight visibility into those incidents from another tool, especially if you're thinking about tracking or calculating DDP at the end of this webinar. And by the way, we're going to share a copy of the Tableau report, the workbook as well, to anybody who's interested in how we calculated it once we get to the live demo here. So just stick with me here as I go through a few more slides. We're going to get to some really cool stuff here, okay? So think about this, value stream integration, picture's worth 1,000 words, right? We got a lot of stuff going on. We have businesses, we have customers. You're serving probably both. You're probably serving consumers with your software. You know, consumers are probably consuming your software, but guess what? Your consumers are also your stakeholders. They're your colleagues sitting across the street or across the office or across the hall. Those are also our consumers as quality assurance leaders. So we have a lot of responsibility, you know, not only from the outside world, but also from the inside world. We're going to make sure this software is working up to par. As part of that, we're in charge of that balance between speed and quality, but we're also necessarily responsible for the compliance aspects of things. If you work in healthcare, if you work in defense, if you work in pharmaceutical, you understand that compliance is a bear, okay? And part of compliance is ensuring that if you're having all these different systems talking to one another, the auditability trail, the traceability between the artifacts, it needs to remain intact as artifacts, work products move from system to system to system, okay? A different view, just a different slice on what I showed you before. This is what it comes down to when it comes to the work artifacts flowing from persona to persona. You know, we're the testers over here, if you think about that. But, you know, we work in teams. You might be embedded in a sprint team. You might be embedded in a scrum team as an example, or you might not. There's still organizations that they decentralize their testing and they're involved when they need to be in a sprint. But at the end of the day, the work products, you look at this diagram, eventually all streams converge into one. Right? All these tributaries converge into this river that eventually is going to open up into the Gulf of Mexico as an example, the Mississippi, right? So we have to work together. That's why I underscored Deming's quote of quality is everyone's responsibility. There is a business analyst sitting out there right now that's developing a functional design that is probably thinking in his or her head, I need to make this as clear as possible. And if I don't, the risk is a defect could be injected into the software delivery lifecycle. So that's her responsibility or his responsibility. It's the same thing with a project manager that's sitting somewhere in the world overseeing his team, trying to motivate his team or inspire them to do their very best every day to ensure that requirements are unambiguous, that they're clear when they get handed off to the development team to create. Okay? So moving on to this, and this is just a consolidation of the data as I mentioned before, and one of the ways that we do this, and I want to talk about TaskTop for a second. TaskTop has enabling technology known as Integration Hub. And you've probably heard of TaskTop if you're on this webinar. And what we do is we've changed the paradigm in terms of how integration is done. We do it the best because we have focused from the beginning in building our product on what we call model-based integration. Model-based integration is markedly different from point-to-point integration. And this is how I like to best explain it. Okay, so my wife is of Hispanic heritage. Her father speaks predominantly Spanish. So when I'm speaking to her father, it's either I'm speaking quote unquote Spanglish or my wife is translating. It's pretty easy when it comes to that because there's only one point of translation. Now, there are other members of our family from Germany on my side that speak mostly German. Okay, so when you bring that into the equation, you have your translation count jumps, especially if there's German speakers, English speakers, myself with a little bit of Spanish, and then my father-in-law. Okay, so you have a translation count of 3 different. Not too bad, but it's still a little bit cumbersome, right? Let's jump that to 6 languages, and you see the translation count jumps to 15. Okay, this is what we're facing today. As an ecosystem, this is what we're facing today as organizations. Software-defined enterprises are facing this problem today. You have so many different best-of-breed tools trying to work in concert with one another, and it's becoming inefficient and ineffective to carry on with the modus of operandum of point-to-point integration. So we TaskTop has redefined the model, and we've introduced what we dub as model-based integration. So what model-based integration does is, the translators, we don't need that many translators. We need a model. We need a model to work all this out. So all the languages across the site, let's just create a centralized model so that we can communicate with everybody throughout, okay? We've done it successfully with TaskTop Integration Hub across a myriad of different artifacts. Today, we're going to be looking at defects. And I've created a model today, and I'll show you when I lift the hood, where I'm going to take data from ServiceNow. I'm going to flow it through that model. Then I'm going to push it into a centralized SQL Server database. I'm going to do the same from ALM.net. I'm going to flow it through the model, push it into that SQL Server database, okay? So here we go. It's 11:36. I want to be respectful of your time, and I want to get into the real cool stuff that we're here to show you today, and then we're going to open it up for Q&A, because I think we're going to have a lot of questions on how we did this. And I have a colleague of mine on the phone as well. I give her all the credit in the world. She's the brains behind the creation of this diagram or this graph that I'm going to show you today. So if you have specific questions about it, she's on the line to help answer it, okay? So let's jump into it. Now, before I actually get into the flowing of data back and forth, let's take a look at the graph that was created. And I showed you the static view of this graph in the PowerPoint presentation. This one here is the dynamic view. It's the live view in Tableau. And now, mind you, you can use any BI reporting tool. There's a Microsoft tool out there. There's some SaaS products out there. Ubiq is another one. There's a few others in the market today. So you're not relegated to this particular one. We just happen to build it here. So DDP is, and this is all pretend. This is fictitious data here. I'm not showing you live real data. So we mocked it up a little bit. We've created some data in ALM.net to show you. So picture this on the left as a regression testing cycle that your team goes through. Now, I don't know, maybe you're practicing continuous deployment, maybe you're not. Maybe you're a leader of an ERP team. Oracle, SAP, PeopleSoft, or maybe even a mainframe application. If you are, then you know that maybe you practice bimodal IT, where you have a core set of activities that occurs and you have a monthly service pack. And as part of that monthly service pack, you're introducing enhancements and defect fixes and small change requests into your production environment. So maybe you have a 3 or 4 day window where you do that regression testing, okay? And that 3 or 4 day window is perfect for using DDP, because you can track, you can set your time, your measuring period from the right of this vertical line. You can set it for 30 days. That's what I did as a practitioner. I'd set it for 30 days up until the point that I started regression testing again for that next service pack, okay? And then what you can do is this. You can share this report with your executive team, your C-suite, and you can say, look, here's our DDP for every specific service pack that we're working on. So they can take a glimpse at it and say, okay, well, I'm monitoring the last service pack that the team has released, and your executives can say, wow, I see it. I see the DDP dropping. What corrective actions are we going to take together to improve upon this for the next regression testing cycle? So it becomes a matter of understanding where we're at today, and it really, to me, this is a tool that enables continuous improvement. So you've heard of the term Kaizen. It's a manufacturing term. It's not often used within the realms of software quality assurance, but Kaizen means continuous improvement. So continuous improvement, you need a mechanism to be able to continuously improve, and that is defect detection percentage in my mind. That's being able to monitor this going forward. But above and beyond Kaizen of continuous improvement, of what I explained before around the cost of quality calculation. So this is the cost of quality calculation, and now I have an arbitrary value assigned to each defect and incident. Your team would have to collaborate with your business leaders internally to determine the cost of quality within your organization itself. It could be different, okay? It's not always the same. It's different across each vertical market, okay? But you can associate that with each of these different incidents or items. So let's get into some of the cool stuff. So I have ServiceNow running here, and I'm going to go ahead and log back in. Very simple view here. I'm going to go ahead and create an incident, okay? And let's just say maybe I'm creating it on behalf of a caller. that called in. I'm part of the operations team, and this is a pretty high impact incident. It's high urgency, and you know, I'm going to label it as an incident, and for the purposes of this webinar, I'm just going to preface it with DDP, and perhaps the problem is the portal is completely down, cannot log in. Okay, so as you can see, some of the other stuff comes up here based on what I typed in. You can add attachments, you can add whatever you need to add, and it's still going to flow it. So task top is, we have connectors, okay? So our connectors are working behind the scenes with the APIs that are available for all these best-in-class tools, including ServiceNow. So as soon as I hit submit here, TaskTop under the hood recognizes what's occurring, and basically it's going to move some data. It's going to move it over into a SQL Server data store, okay? And I'll show you some of this. I'm going to lift the hood to TaskTop Integration Hub 2 and show you how easy this is to set up. So in a matter of seconds, this has moved over, right? Now, if I look over here at my metrics and I refresh, let's go and refresh. Notice that jumped, okay? So that jumped, my DDP went down. Let's just say that there's been a flurry or a cluster of activity around a certain sub-feature within our application under test, the product in production, and a team has notified a myriad of different defects, all related to a specific issue. So we're getting calls left and right. The operations team is overwhelmed and incidents are being flown in. So your executive team is monitoring this DDP metric, okay? They probably have it pinned to their Chrome, you know, on their desktop, and they're noticing this in real time, live, that there's an issue, right? And they're noticing the DDP dropping by the moment. So you can say here, cannot ship product out of distribution center A. Maybe they're using an ERP system and they can't, availability to check or commitment doesn't work. So they're logging this, an incident comes in, submitting. TaskTop recognizes artifact created, ServiceNow, moving data into a centralized data store. Okay, that's moved over. So this is updating in real time, the DDP metric here. So this is moving up, and we'll just wait for TaskTop to finish moving that over. And the DDP continues to drop little by little as we move forward. Okay, so you can see how this sort of works together. Now let's jump into, I just want to show you here under the hood really quick, and I'm going to move another screen that I have working onto this main screen. Okay, and we're all sort of a technical background here, so we can follow along. And I'm going to minimize this, and I'm using MySQL Workbench, and I'll go ahead and re-execute this query. So what I've done under the hood is TaskTop Integration Hub has recognized, is pulling that API from ServiceNow. It's also looking at ALM.net. So any defects that were identified in ALM.net, we're taking, the right word is normalizing the data into one database and one table. So for this point, but it doesn't have to just be one table. You can set it up any way you want. For the purposes of this demo today, I created a table I called it DDP, and I mapped specific attributes from ServiceNow to a model, and then the model flowed into the database from both ServiceNow and ALM.net. So if you're still following me, if this makes sense, I'm going to, you know, it's one thing for me to speak to it, but I'm going to give you a visual here in a second, because we're going to lift the hood to TaskTop Integration Hub, and I'm actually going to show you how that works, okay? So we have, it's 11:44. I got about 6 minutes, so just stay with me, and then we'll open this up for Q&A at the end, all right? So all this data is being fed into the centralized data store. So if you look down here, this is all the stuff that cannot ship product out of DCA. You see that was the latest one that I pushed in. There's differentiators in here depending on the repository URL. So if this data came from ServiceNow or ALM, we'll note it here in the repository ALL. So scrolling up here, you can see this came from ALM. So when Mara, my colleague, was creating these reports, she can differentiate based on incident versus defect here in those reports, you know, the left side of that vertical line versus the right side for the calculation itself, okay? So this is the nuts and bolts of it, right? I mean, there's a lot more. We could talk all day about this in terms of the SQL and moving everything in, but that's essentially what happens, right? So let's take a look at Tasktop Integration Hub. So we're going to lift the hood. How did we do this, okay, in 5 minutes or less? So we can start Q&A. So this is how we did it. Model-based integration, very powerful feature of Tasktop. If you look at Defect here, okay, we've been doing this a long time, over 10 years, and as part of it, we've worked with about 60 different best-in-class tools, right? So we understand some of the common attributes, the common denominators, if you will. And out of the box, when you install Tasktop, you get 10 different models, I think, that are pre-installed. You can always change these at will if you like. You can create new models or change the existing ones. But you can see here that a lot of these attributes that come in the defect model also relate to incidents that would flow over from ServiceNow. So we have this model here. We have data in the model available to us. So what does this do for us? First of all, not only does it help when it comes to scaling. So right now we have 2 different endpoints. We have ServiceNow, we have ALM.net. What if you're using other tools as well in your organization to track defects or to track incidents or vulnerabilities? You can start to easily plug and play those different endpoints into your model, and this is how you do it. So in collections, we create a collection, and think of a collection as a magnifying glass sort of looking at a subset of data within a larger picture, within a larger repository, so to speak. And we have ALM here, okay, and we have Defect tied to the defect model. We have ServiceNow also tied to the defect model, and we have our database, our centralized data store here, okay? So I created a collection for each of those. And what I'm doing is I'm taking data from ALM and ServiceNow, and I'm flowing it through the model into this database, into a database table. And the best way to represent this is really to sort of take a look at what I have set up here, okay? So look at this. We have ALM here, we have ServiceNow here, we have centralized data store here. ALM is flowing into this data, flowing into the defect model, so is ServiceNow, and it's being normalized. Tasktop does all the lifting behind the scenes stuff, the boring stuff. If you think about the normalization, it's moving it into the database, right? DDP here on the right. Now what's happening, of course, Tableau is reading on that database and reporting out in real time. And that's how we went ahead and created that live metric on the other screen. And I'll just get back to that on here, okay? And the QA team savings here, you can see that dropped even lower. That's in the red. That's because I created more incidents, right? When I was creating more incidents in ServiceNow, your QA team savings cost is going to drop because you're actually, in effect, costing your organization money when incidents are identified in your production environment. So that's DDP at a high level. As part of this too, I just want to mention before we get into the Q&A, Charlene, that we do have a few different things, and one of those is a free ebook that details how you can create DDP in your organization, okay? It's sort of your insider's ebook that we'll send out to all the registrants on this call today. And we also, too, have that Tableau packaged workbook that we can provide to you, what I just showed you today. You'll have to reach out to us, and from there we can set up a session and give you this workbook. So I'll turn this over to Charlene. Charlene?
All right, great. So we've gotten some really good questions in so far, so we'll just jump right on in.
Sure.
First question, this looks cool, but we're moving from ALM to Q-Test. Could you do the same thing with other testing tools?
Yes, and that's the easy answer, yes. So we have support for, I think it's up to 60 different endpoints or adapters, somewhere in that realm. So the beauty of Tasktop Integration Hub is we're in the business of integration, so we build connectors, right, between these different tools. So any tool that your team is using is something generally we're going to support it. You know, there are tools out there that we don't, but I think we have the largest collection of support endpoints available. So Q-Test, yes, absolutely.
All right, great. The next question, can you use Tasktop to consolidate and report on other testing activities besides defects and incidents?
Yes, that's a common question that we get. So defects and incidents are pretty straightforward. We also can collect and report on other artifacts, maybe requirements. Depending on how you define a requirement, they could be features, epics, user stories, tasks for that matter, but also specific artifacts related to testing. We do have support for some of that as well, so that's available too if you want to, understand the execution status of an exploratory test that was executed in VSTS as an example, versus how many automated tests were kicked off and ran through Tosca or perhaps UFT. There's different ways that we can do that. Oftentimes, as you know, not getting into too much detail, but UFT is natively integrated with ALM.NET, so that data would be available in ALM.NET, and then we can oftentimes grab that data and move it into a centralized data store to report on. Yeah, so we cover all that as well.
All right, great. Let's see, next question. How do you determine cost of quality?
Whew, that is a loaded question, Charlene. I'm not sure who asked that one. So I am not going to even venture down that path. I can tell you this, cost of quality is a much more complex calculation than defect detection percentage. DDP is fairly elementary. You saw the calculation. It's what I call simple yet complex. The complexity from DDP, and I'm not deflecting. I'll get right back to cost of quality. But, yeah, the complexity from DDP comes from the multitude of different systems and bringing it together. That's why value stream integration is so important. It relates back to what I said at the beginning of the webinar. I want people to remember this that have joined today. Quality assurance leaders and testing managers are taking a back to the basics approach. And back to the basics sometimes means understanding what you're faced with from that eagle's eye perspective, looking at things holistically. That's what value stream integration is all about, right? You want to know what's happening across your value streams. It's holistic mindset, right? So in terms of cost of quality, let's get to the question. It's different depending on the vertical market that you're working within, and there's a lot of different variables that come into play, okay? There's variables such as how much does it cost to prevent a defect versus how much did it cost to detect a defect. And that all happens to the left of that vertical line that you're seeing on my screen right now during the software delivery lifecycle. But then there's also a cost to the business when you didn't detect that defect and it was found in production. And it's usually 3 to 4 times what it would have cost before you moved to production, before you move that build to production. And the further you shift left, and you go further upstream. That's why I underscored that there's a business analyst sitting out there somewhere right now writing a functional design that is wondering whether or not she should put in the extra effort to detail it out at the level of granularity needed so that the test designers can get a good, adequate picture of what to build that high-level test scenario from. And she or he absolutely should do a much more granular job, because guess what? If she does that, she's saving the organization money at the end of the day, because that requirement is unambiguous and will create, more value for the organization.
All right, great. We have probably time for 2, maybe 3 more questions. So we'll keep rolling here. How do you calculate test automation coverage per se in an agile environment?
So test automation coverage is a tricky one. Here's why. So depending on, as you know, there's many different tools that you can use for test automation coverage. And there's different types of automated tests. You can have quick smoke tests that are kicked off on the fly by Selenium as an example when you do a code commit. And these are very short, quick hit tests that are automated. There's also much longer running tests, such as your regression tests that are automated from tools such as UFT or SmartBear Test Complete or Tricentis Tosca. So these are longer, more lengthy tests that are more or less for regression testing. They're UI level testing. Whereas you have other tools, like I said, that help with API level testing or quick hit tests, stuff like that. So calculating coverage from that perspective, to me, and this relates back to the back to basics approach. I'm a fundamentalist in the sense that I believe that traceability is of utmost importance. So you need to, regardless of whether it's an automated test or or automated regression test or just a quick hit automated smoke test when you're doing a code check-in, it needs to be traced back to the test and also the requirement. And then for me, calculating test coverage analysis or test coverage from an automated perspective is about, do you have the traceability in place? If you do, then you should be able to calculate that regardless of whether it's automated testing or if it's manual testing or even exploratory testing for that matter. A lot of the tools today in the market, and I'll just wrap with this quickly, Charlene, a lot of the tools in the market today, they come equipped with the built-in ability to run exploratory tests too. And an artifact is actually created in those tools as a result of that exploratory test. So that data needs to also be traced back to something in order to properly report on test coverage analysis.
All right, great. The next question, is there a good industry benchmark for DDP?
Not one that I found. No, I mean, I haven't found one. You can jump on Google and start looking, but I would say anything above 90%. If I could give just personal opinion, I would say above 90% is pretty good. It depends. I mean, if you think about it this way too, Charlene, like Net Promoter Score as an example, something a lot of organizations use to measure customer satisfaction amongst their consumers, and the NPS varies markedly by the industry that they're in. And the same thing applies to DDP. It's going to vary by the industry that you're in. So depending on what industry you work in, your DDP you might need to be way up there. And now just quick example, Charlene. So I come from a broad background where one of my backgrounds was defects in a defense department, working for them. Defects introduced into the production environment means, boots and bullets could not arrive on time somewhere, as an example. That's a big problem because lives are on the line. So a DDP of 98% is where you want to be. Right? Whereas another environment, startup environment that I worked in before, where it was a product that, was used by property managers and landlords, if I introduce a bug into the production environment, so, maybe they can't generate a lease agreement, what they do, nobody's getting hurt, right? So oftentimes there's a big difference.
Okay. All right, great. So real quick, last question, and then we'll wrap it up. We can get a 30-second or less answer. Does TaskTop work with BI tools other than Tableau?
Yes, it does. Absolutely. So any kind of BI tool that can read a SQL Server table, for that matter, because if you think about it, or Oracle or any kind of database table for that matter, this report that you see in front of me, Tableau, this isn't tied to TaskTop Integration Hub. It's tied to a database. So TaskTop was actually pulling data from ServiceNow and ALM.net and funneling it, if you will, into a database. And then the report that we built here is looking at that database.
All right, great. Is there a list somewhere of all those other ones that it works with, or?
We do, yeah. We have if you go out to tasktop.com and go to resources, or reach out to us through our website, we can certainly provide a list.
Awesome. All right, great. Well, that is all the time that we have for the questions. And if we didn't get to yours, I apologize. Just ran out of time, but please know that the folks at TaskTop are getting a copy of all the questions, so I'm sure somebody will be more than happy to follow up with you after the event. I also want to remind the audience that today's event has been recorded, so if you missed any or all of it, or if you just want to listen to it again, you'll be able to access the webinar on demand. We're going to be sending out a link to everybody post-event that will take you to the webinar on demand. And also the webinar will be on the devops.com website. So if you just go there, click on webinars on demand, it should be sitting there right waiting for you to access at any time. While you're there, also check out the other webinars that we have on devops.com, both upcoming and on demand. Hopefully there'll be something that piques your interest. But for now, Matt Enger, thank you so much for being here today and providing such a great presentation. I know the audience got a lot out of it, judging from the questions that came through. So thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Charlene. I appreciate it.
Great. And I'd also like to thank the audience for joining me today. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm signing off. Have a great day, everybody.